Another week of Chainsaw Man, another week of gushing over how incredibly enjoyable it really is. It's nice to get a really inspired anime adaptation, something that's filled with so much talent and creativity, but also the right amount of respect towards the original work. And while it's a different direction, they're taking it a more realistic, grounded, darker approach, which definitely loses out on a bit of Fujimoto's charm within the manga, which is very colorful and playful. It's a different Chainsaw Man experience, but one that is very much brilliant. I've sat through some very rough anime adaptations for some of my favorite manga, and it's always disappointing. And I don't want to point fingers on this or that or where it went wrong, but it's rough at the end of the day when the animation industry is so overworked and understaffed and undervalued even. You know, so many talented people, if given enough time, can create something very special. But a lot of the times it can seem like they're trying to nickel and dime and cut every corner just to produce some sort of content to capitalize on top of a manga. For once, it is refreshing to get everything that I feel like Chainsaw Man fans deserve. A great experience. And this episode really goes above and beyond to connect you with these characters, to show these very intimate moments, and in a really stylistic way. There's a couple of scenes that stand out to me, some that have been moved around or at least changed within their own interpretation, right? The first one that I think a lot of people are going to talk about and may be a little bit disappointed within is the Gun Devil explanation. When we go into this, originally the Gun Devil explanation is littered with a death count all across the globe, and it's kind of periodic in its sense where you watch it gradually get bigger and bigger and you get a massive scale or scope of what the Gun Devil can provide. You don't necessarily get that here. You get some of it, but it's not as periodic and it's not as sequential as what the manga does. Does this take away from the scene? I don't necessarily think so. Mostly in the department of the bigger picture of the Gun Devil, you don't really get the true, I guess, value from it, but you still get a great understanding of how powerful this individual is. Personally, I think the reason why they done this is so you're more focused on Aki's intimate moment. He plays a very vital role for the Gun Devil, and you'll see that moving forward within the story. And understanding him, how he functions, his character, his emotions is very important. And they're doing a lot to make that emotional connection more viable. And I think they're doing a great job, especially with this flashback scene where you get to see Aki's childhood for the first time. The sense of anxiety within here, just building on top of this intensity, is really suffocating. And then it gets sliced through like butter with the death of his family. You see this house get completely annihilated right in front of his eyes, which changes his life drastically, changes his attitude, changes how vulnerable he is to people. And then you even see that linked onto Himeno and how they share kind of similar experiences. And really this moment in time has pushed Aki in a very specific direction for his future to where he is now, obviously. When it comes to the Gun Devil, you may not get that narrative overlay for how much death this devil actually causes, but you still get a portion of the scary nature of it, which I think is kind of fine. At the end of the day, it's probably more so what you value from that scene. And without going into spoiler territory for how the Gun Devil is actually handled, it's not a long-term negative. It's kind of funny how the Gun Devil is actually played within the manga, and I think it's going to throw a lot of people off within the future with how it all comes to a conclusion. It's not the way that you think it would be. I love the Aki scenes, I love the vulnerability within it, I love the direction and just the cinematography that they went for. It was brutal, and I think they nailed that emotion perfectly, especially with what this correlates to within the future. And I know all the manga readers understand where that's going. It will be painful and it will tear your heart out. A lot of focus on this episode is around Denji and Makima's interaction. It's very sensual, it is intimate, and they do everything within their power to make it known. Obviously, this is a massive moment for Denji. He was feeling lost and confused and felt like his dream didn't really have the value that he thought it would. Obviously, you experience it at the beginning of the episode with power and him kind of being falsely led into it, and while it was still a shock to him, it didn't feel worthwhile. So he kind of gets derailed a little bit, and Makima is the one to bring him back into the centerfold. And knowing how her character functions, this is a part of her. This is what she's proficient at doing. This scene is handled with so much care and attention to detail that it may even be a little bit uncomfortable for people. But it's important to note that this really does round off Denji's goal, his plan, his future ideas, his dreams specifically. And he is someone that is considered a dreamer. And while they may not be the same as Aki or Power or anyone else, they're still just as important. Mind you, this isn't just sheer fan fan service either. It definitely plays into that heavily, but contextually within the story, you'll see it unravel itself within the future, and you'll most likely come back to this scene after all of the future knowledge that you find out about and figure out why it was handled the way it was, and kind of have like a realization point for yourself. Like, wow, okay, I didn't necessarily think about this scene like this, but with the future context, it actually makes a lot of sense. The framing, the animation, the visuals, everything that went into it was just beautifully handled. It was a very intimate scene, and I loved it, to be honest. I thought it was incredibly well done. From here, we move into the hotel scene. This is a great group altercation that really shows the different characteristics for all of these individuals and how they mesh and meld with one another. Specifically, people that take the spotlight, Himeno and Kobeni, they are the newest people within the fold, but they also have personalities that stick out rather drastically. Himeno is more on the commanding side. She has a history with Aki, which they do play on, and she stands out within that regard. But then you have Kobeni, who is like the complete opposite, someone that's extremely scared and nervous and overly anxious, and you can't help but love her. She adds so much variety to the cast of characters, to the story, to even the flow of emotions, and she actually, funny enough, handles a lot of the emotion tailoring through this episode when she's present. What I mean by this is that you'll notice that maybe Denji or Aki or Power, whoever, will steal the scene for a good portion of the time, and you're focusing fully on them, but they'll attach Kobeni pretty much on the end half of it to rip the attention away and to focus on her. And it's not like a drastic shift, it's not meant to be jarring or to throw you off course, but it's more so meant to, I would say, push your attention towards these newer characters and how they balance each other out. So you're seeing Denji and Power, etc., but then you're seeing Kobeni and Himeno and how they act so differently, but how they stand out on their own. There's a great balancing act between this. When you have very powerful characters on either side of that balance, you have to share the spotlight pretty respectfully and generously. And for the newer people that are coming in that need a little bit more attention, you'll notice the spotlight will kind of randomly leak onto them just to make sure you remember that they're there. This hotel sequence is very massive. It's very chaotic and all over the place, and you're going to see a lot of these characters at their lowest of points, and it's going to be fun. Terrifying, but also fun. And I'm extremely excited to see how they handle it all. Just the brief snippet of them entering the hotel and figuring out what's going on is a great, slow and methodical introduction to it, which I feel like every single week I mention pacing, how they handle these scenes and how everything feels very drawn out, but I love it. It's a slower pace, but something that you can indulge within very deeply and really just sit within the moment as much as you want. You pair that with incredible voice acting, the music behind everything, it absorbs you. You won't focus on anything else but what's going on within this moment. Admittedly, it might not be for everyone, but for Chainsaw Man fans, as much as it's different, it's very much appreciated. This is a beautiful, solid episode with some great performances, lovely visuals, great direction, and everything from start to finish. I am continuously impressed, but also endlessly happy with where they're going with this show, how they're handling different encounters, how they're handling characters, and what they're giving a lot more attention and focus to compared to others. Even the small changes that they make to deviate from the manga, I'm pretty much okay with. I don't think it devalues the experience, I don't think it changes anything integrally, but it may shift some perceptions for a lot of you here and there, especially the Gun Devil situation. I think that's going to be kind of a lingering one that people wanted just a tiny bit more of. It's not the end of the world, it's not going to ruin your whole experience, but it would have been nice if they did relay a little bit more of that information. To not get on your bad sides again, I didn't forget about the ending. It feels like every single week we're seeing a masterclass of creativity. I don't know how they think about these endings or these visuals or even the songs that go with them, but somehow they've just sat down and said, you know what, let's just make the most creative, over the top, wild endings that we can have for every single episode. And sometimes they're not even like that. The Power one, for example, is pretty straightforward. It's fully surrounding her, and it's definitely not as creative, but it's very lovable. But this one in comparison is overly creative. There's so much symbolism and so much context that a lot of people aren't going to understand, and so much different visual interpretations. This isn't to say that this one's better or that one's better, but I love the approach. They're not always trying to be creative in this aspect or that aspect, but more so with what they're feeling for that ending. And usually it's pretty appropriate. I think it's a nice balance for the episode that you watch, and then you get the ending that doesn't really spoil anything, but it does play into a lot of the manga fan service, I would say. All of these endings so far don't really have much context for anime onlys, and that's perfectly okay because you don't want to get spoiled. But for manga fans, you're easily going to pick up on a lot of things that happen within the future, and it's them just throwing it in on the sly and having fun with this really interesting idea. The music's great, the animation, the visual, the color work, the craziness that goes on within it, I absolutely love it. And it it makes me excited for the rest of them, especially TK, who done the opening for Tokyo Ghoul, so that one's going to be fun. I wholeheartedly enjoyed this episode. I thought it was brilliant. I'm excited for next week, as usual, typical gushing for myself, but I want to hear your thoughts, your favorite moment from the episodes, some things you liked, some things you disliked. Let me know right now. Thank you.